everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. I post every Tuesday and Saturday. I'm currently a senior at UC Berkeley, and I'm here to share my journey as an upcoming young adult fantasy author, as well as talk all things books. Today, we're going to be talking about the highly anticipated The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I'm sure there are numerous reviews up already, but if you're still interested in learning and knowing about my reviews, stay tuned. Because without further ado, I'm Christine and this is Editorial Edge. So, to start off with a little background, the plot of the story follows President Snow before he was president of Panem. If you don't know who President Snow is, in the last Hunger Games trilogy, he was the president of Panem and he was the main antagonist, kind of, to Katniss and the rest of the Hunger Games group during that time. He was evil, calculated, not a good guy. So when it released that this story was going to talk about him, a lot of us were concerned as to what this story was going to be about. Whether or not it was going to paint President Snow in a good way, whether or not it romanticized his villainous character. There's a lot going on in the conversation. So I can't say that the choice to pick President Snow as the leading character in this book was interesting and controversial. I personally don't think I was that worried in where this story was gonna go concerning President Snow, because even if Suzanne Collins made the decision to talk about President Snow in a lighter form, I don't think I would necessarily dislike it just because of that. I actually like learning about a villain's backstory, so. And another thought that I had before reading this book, and maybe we all share this too, was how the story was going to develop the world of Panem as well as the Hunger Games in general. I think that aspect was what I was mostly anticipating, just learning more about the world and how the characters interact in it. That pretty much sums up my general thoughts before I got the book and I started reading it. Okay, so after reading this book, here are my pros and cons. What I wanted from this book in particular was what I just said. I wanted to learn more about Panem and its early foundations, and I think this book did exactly that. And since this is kind of early on after the war happened, a lot of the characters, including President Snow, are in a phase of thinking about how the world is going to look after this war and how instilling the Hunger Games is going to change the dynamic and prevent any wars from happening in the future. I really liked that kind of overarching theme that Suzanne Collins instilled. One, because I just really love and enjoy reading about world building. But two, I think I got a better understanding of what the Hunger Games was based on the original Hunger Games trilogy. I got to learn a lot more about why things came to be, why these districts came to be what they were, and see the dynamic between how people react and respond to war in general. And I think in one of Suzanne Collins' interviews, she says that the majority of this book and the reason why she chose President Snow as the character to follow was because she wanted to explore more theories on war and the response to war, which I think is really cool. In the last few pages of the actual book, there's a section where Suzanne Collins kind of does a Q&A and answers some questions revolving on why she chose to write this book in the first place. And here she mentions that a lot of the reasons and the ideas and concepts that she talks about in this book kind of revolve around Enlightenment thinkers. These people include Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And as a rhetoric major at UC Berkeley, these are all authors and readers that I study. So it's really interesting to kind of follow along and know the theories that she's implementing in these books. And I think she did really well in how she includes and talks about war theory in this book in general. Another part that I enjoyed about this book was also related to my general thoughts before I even read it. And it was over the question of how President Snow was going to be portrayed in this book. I think that President Snow was portrayed how I would assume he would be portrayed. Definitely wasn't talked about or portrayed as if he was a good guy from the get-go and he like turned evil. I think she does really well in painting a character that's conflicted but still acts on bad decisions, which I don't usually see in books, honestly. There's always the trope of, you know, the bad guy turning into the good guy or the good guy turning into the bad guy. But I think President Snow's character is a little more complicated because he doesn't really want to ever be the good guy, and even when he makes good decisions, they're not really for anyone else but himself. So I guess in that aspect, I liked how his character developed. And even thinking about when he was first introduced in the original Hunger Games trilogy, how those characteristics still existed when he was an old man. So unfortunately, now it's time to talk about the cons. I kind of have a lot more cons than I do pros. I really wanted to enjoy this book, and despite the pros that I just said, I generally didn't really like this book as much as I wanted to. And I don't think I necessarily even wanted to like this book as much as I like the Hunger Games trilogy, because I don't know, because when I first heard about this book and then when I found out that the story was going to be following President Snow, I didn't really feel as excited as I would with other anticipated books. But I mean, that's fine because I don't have to be excited over every book that comes out. But I did hope that it would at least wow me more than I should have, you know? I wish it made me feel guilty for not anticipating and wanting to read it way more. But I just don't think this book left me feeling that way. One of the big reasons why I didn't like this book was because I found it really boring. The scenes kind of were forgettable for me. And I think this is where my reviews may be different, because also as a writer and an author, I'm constantly having classes and being told, you know, if a scene doesn't work to progress your story, it's not needed. And I felt like when reading this book, there are a lot of moments where I'm like, I don't think this scene is needed. And I want to say that's because I don't find President Snow's story that compelling or interesting, and I think his character is kind of boring. And even when I finished the book, I was just like, I don't even remember the scenes that I did like afterwards. The Hunger Games world has so many characters and so many different ways in which this book can be talked about, and how the conversation of war could be mentioned, where I just don't think that President Snow's story was the best one to tell that. Another reason why I didn't like this book was because I thought the relationship and the romance that was building between Snow and Hunger Games tribute from District 12 in this book, Lucy Gray, the romance in this was like, it didn't need to happen almost. Because when I was reading this, I just felt like the relationship and the bond that Snow and Lucy Gray built was just kind of like a middle school crush that's happened, but honestly forgettable. It's like, sure, Lucy Gray impacted Snow and the decisions he makes in the future, but there's always going to be one person that comes into your life and impacts you and changes your perspective and your view and your decisions, and how that alters the rest of your life. And honestly, that person can be forgettable. The actions that they did may not be forgettable, but it's like okay, considering Snow and the way that he was characterized as someone who was also poor at the Capitol, I feel like there's a much better route that could have talked about his upbringing and the experience he went through and how that impacted his outlook on war and the Hunger Games and what Panem was supposed to look like, other than having a story where he falls in love with a tribute who, you know, I don't want to spoil it, but yeah. I think I'm speaking from the opinion and the thought that honestly this shouldn't even have been a novel. I think it should have just been a novella. I just don't think this book needs to be 500 plus pages and include a story that doesn't really need to be said necessarily in terms of the romance. And I think Suzanne Collins could have talked about, you know, war theory and the conversations of war and what she wanted out of this book. I hope I don't piss some of y'all off with this review, but, you know, your opinions are your opinions and mine are mine. I will say that I don't regret reading this book because from an upcoming author standpoint, I personally witnessed and experienced a reading session where I found a lot of things that I didn't like about a book, and that's something that I can keep in mind in my own writing. But also, I just think reading this book was necessary for me because I love reading and I love the Hunger Games, and I'm glad I got to see a snippet and a better understanding of the world building that Suzanne Collins has made. But will I ever reread it? Probably not. But given everything that I've said, including my general thoughts, my pros, my cons, and my overall conclusion, I give The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes a 3 out of 5 stars. But that's all from me today. I hope y'all enjoyed reading my review despite it not being the most positive review. If you read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are. And if you haven't read this book, leave a comment telling me what your concerns are after hearing this review. So don't forget to like this video, share, and comment while you're down there. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and I just launched my own personal blogging website where I'll be talking about books, author journeys, author resources, writing resources, creative topics, book reviews, and so much more. So the links will all be provided down below. And until next time, bye y'all.